had a little bit of a hiatus there after the completion of our very exciting series that we did on Jurassic Park. Little time away. I would say for me probably needed due to some personal circumstances, but honestly pretty happy to be back recording another episode with you today.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to have my 2 feet back after getting intense burns on them for standing barefoot in the sand on a beach looking to the southwest longingly for a little too long.
Yeah, and then after you getting tangled with the Costa Rican National Guard, that was kind of a bad scene. Yeah, you kind of had to go to the hospital for a little while there. That I don't mean to tell your business here, but we were all pretty worried about you, to be honest.
Good news, the napalm strike has left no lasting damage.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I guess you were outside of the range of direct contact.
Yeah. Welcome to the Sad Boys Book Club. It's been a hot minute. My name is Dusty.
And I am Daniel.
And we are doing The Shining for October, the Halloween month. Ooh.
Yeah, I'm. This is probably our first seasonally themed book. That's a concept that I'm actually kind of interested in doing moving forward. We've talked about it a little bit. Moving forward, we'd like to do stuff like a Black History during Black History Month. Something to kind of give different times of the year a little bit of a distinct flavor, a little bit different, or to spotlight, different groups that might not get as much coverage in a lot of the wider media.
A theme, if you will.
Yeah.
We did have plans for September for Hispanic Heritage, but those, to kind of pull the curtain back a little bit, those kind of fell through a combination of availability and not getting really set with a book in time.
Yeah, it was just one of those situations where we weren't quite able to get together and get a book at the right time, and eventually kind of snowballs on you. But so apologies for that, but we're looking forward to doing that next year.
The Shining.
The Shining. I just some thoughts off the rip here. I really liked it so far. We've only read the first 2 parts, so it's broken up into, I want to say, 5 parts.
Yes.
And we've only, for the purposes of this podcast, we're only gonna talk about parts 1 and 2.
The full schedule is and the book very conveniently kind of split itself up into quarters like this. The first quarter of the book is part 1 and 2. The second quarter is part 3, the third quarter is part 4, and the final quarter is part 5. It very, very conveniently separated itself in such a way that we had very clear stop points so that we could cover this in 4 episodes and cover this book in 4 relatively even quarters. I think there's like a plus or minus 10 pages for each quarter, for each part. So, yeah, anyone reading along, today is going to be part 1 and 2. And then next week, part 3, the week after, part 4, and the final week, part 5. So, it worked out well. The elephant in the room with this book is going to be the movie.
I've noticed that started to become a theme here, but that's 100% not intentional on our part. We're actually not picking books with well-known film adaptations.
Which I do feel like, outside of probably right now, I don't think there's ever really going to be a need to bring up the film because famously Kubrick took King's book and basically threw it in the trash and said, I'm making my own movie that is relatively based off of your book, and King was not a fan of that. So I feel like we're not going to really, unless we wanted to have a bit where we're talking about, well, in the book this happens, but in the movie this happens, which is just not really conducive to good conversation for the book itself, I feel like this is really the only time we really need to bring up the movie.
Yeah. Essentially, that's fair. I mean, I think that it's yeah. He really uses the book more as a loose framework, kind of like you were alluding to there. But it just, I don't know. I've heard. I'm just curious. I might want to revisit just one more time when we get to the end, because the King has some specific complaints, I guess, about how the book was depicted in the film, particularly with some alterations to the nature of certain characters and certain situations. I would maybe that might be interesting, like towards the end when we're kind of doing a wrap.
Halloran. Sorry.
To like give thoughts there. Oh no, it's all good. I don't know. That might be worth discussing. That I don't think it's worth going into the specific critiques at the moment. Just one of those things to kind of set the stage for that later.
Yeah, I don't want to go too deep into the movie because, like I said, it's not honestly relevant to the conversation in the book. But I want to just get my little snobbery out here because I have such a high importance of self-worth and opinion. I will fully acknowledge the object truth that is the quality of the film The Shining by Stanley Kubrick. I don't like it. I've never liked the film. It's just not for me. I don't think it's a bad film. I think it absolutely deserves the praise it's received, especially in the acting categories, I guess. It's just not a film that I've ever personally cared for, and I don't much care for it. It's just a personal preference. It's not me saying the movie is bad. It is not a bad movie. I just don't personally like it.
I don't want to derail us here, but I have an astonishingly hot Kubrick opinion. That I'm kind of, I have broadly similar feelings about the movie The Shining. Maybe a little bit more positive than you, but generally feel the same. I think that the best Kubrick films are actually, with the exception of Eyes Wide Shut, which is one of his more well-known ones, I think his better film, definitely his last one. I think his lesser-known films like Paths of Glory, for example, are better than any of the more famous, well-known, and more widely discussed ones.
Yeah, I appreciate The Shining on a technical level, on a filmmaking level, on a artistry level, but I just don't have any personal enjoyment watching the film itself. So that is not a condemnation of the film. That is just a personal preference of enjoyment.
I know. I can already see the angry comments.
Yeah, I just really want to make that clear. I'm not saying that it's a bad movie. I am not at all. It's just me saying, I get it. It's just not for me.
I think that's fair to say.
So, unless you got anything else, you ready to go into the book itself?
I guess last little thought here while I'm thinking about it. In case anybody is interested in reading this book, just want to give a quick content warning that this book does discuss some pretty heavy topics. You know, of course, there's your standard horror type things, of course, but there's some like interpersonal situations like abuse and, you know, physical abuse, verbal abuse, that kind of thing that could be upsetting if so. You know, just to let you know if you may be sensitive to that sort of thing. And there are certain outdated attitudes and probably diagnostic criteria and just ways that certain things in neurodivergence are talked about and thought about. So again, it's something to be mindful, I would say. Finally, I want to give just a quick warning, as this book does depict a character with outdated attitudes towards the LGBT community. So these are just things that you may want to be mindful of just going into the book. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into the story, the meat of the story itself. The book opens with Jack Torrance, who he's the main character, sitting in a job interview, and in this very sort of like typical sort of late 20th century office room, and he's listening to the guy who's interviewing him, Stuart Ullman, who is the boss of the hotel. I forget his specific title, but the point is he's the boss of the hotel. Is that what they call him? Okay.
Yeah, he's just manager.
Yeah, he's the manager of the hotel. He's Jack Torrance refers to him as being very officious, and I think we see that throughout. He's a little bit, he's obviously given Jack kind of the business here. He's kind of he's really puffing himself up. He's really talking up the hotel, and he's generally I'm sure this is an experience almost everybody's had, where they're in a job interview with somebody that is just absolutely just totally eaten up with the culture and the hype of a workplace. It's to be honest, it's pretty grating, and I can understand how annoying that might be. But so they're going back and forth, and there's kind of like the job that Jack is interviewing for is sort of like a handyman that's supposed to winter at the hotel. This is not so much a thing anymore, but at the time this book was written, back in the late 70s, there were still quite a few places in the Rocky Mountains that you just could not get to after a certain point of the year, at least not very easily. So a lot of places like the hotel, and the real hotel that it is based off of, which I can't recall the name of, but they used to be open during the spring through the, I guess, early mid fall, and then once you start getting into like freezing temperatures and snowfall, they gotta shut it down. So cold weather can be pretty hard on structures, particularly ones as big as the hotel. So that's what Jack is interviewing for. He's trying to be the winter handyman. He's just gonna maintain the place, keep everything okay, so that when next May rolls around, they'll be good to open up. And so Ullman is talking about that. Jack, he is kind of tuning him out, to be fair, but as he drones on, he finally kind of picks up. He starts paying attention to the conversation when Ullman brings up his family, and are they going to be able to handle the winter? And that's kind of the introduction of this theme that's going to kind of go through the book. This cabin fever, the family bonds. The idea of families that are isolated, that this is kind of like the introduction of some of these ideas.
When are we going to get a modern reimagining of The Shining called The Shining 2020? What do you mean I can't leave for 14 days? I guess we should clarify, just to give a real expanse of the time. So it's from was it October 1st when they closed it? I don't remember the exact day, but I think it is in October.
I think it was October, early October, maybe even October 1st through May 12th.
Yes.
But they were going to open it the 20th or something like that.
I could just imagine Wendy sitting there, and she's like, "But what will I do if I can't get my hair and nails done?"
I think that's kind of what Ullman is getting at. Is he's like, there's a couple things that he mentions too. He's like, well, I mean, we've tried this a bunch of ways. That people by themselves, or men, usually men by themselves, they don't do so well. Um, and even younger men, older men, that doesn't really work as well. What usually keeps people sane is this, having enough people there, like a family, the families that are there, having having that sort of connection. But it is a big ask. That's almost 7 months of isolation.
Ullman he made it clear to Torrance that he was pushing for a singular person, like a college student, like taking a year off as opposed to a family thing because of we'll get into it later, but because of the Grady incident.
Okay, I think maybe I'm conflating things. Maybe I'm thinking of the Grady incident. Either way, during the interview, it becomes clear that just as Jack doesn't really think much of Ullman really doesn't think that much of Jack, and he basically flat out tells him, like, look, you've got a guy vouching for you for this job. That's basically made it clear to us that we have to give you the job. But if it were up to me, no, I would absolutely not hire you.
Yeah, so no real ambiguity there.
Yeah, no. Ullman is he's not particularly likable, but he is very honest. Which I don't know. I'm of the camp that it's not just enough to be honest, but a lot of people seem to appreciate a straight shooter, and I guess we'll give Ullman that.
Yeah, you could say that he is a straight shooter with upper management written all over him.
Yeah, he's one of those guys. Anyway, so Ullman takes Jack around, and he's kind of going through the floor plan, talking about the attic, and basically saying, this is storage. Do not let your son go into the attic for any reason. And that kind of rankles Jack a little bit. Because he's like, oh, this kind of touches on another thing that will kind of become a recurring theme, is Jack being very sensitive about his fitness as a father. That's going to be a recurrent theme. So keep an ear out for that, or eye out, I guess, if you're reading it. And he mentions he wants to set rat traps in the attic, but also there's no rats. There's no rats in the hotel. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you heard, but there are no rats. And I think that's something that's kind of funny. He's like he's like, yeah, and you might want to set some rat traps, but there's no rats. It's totally fine. We don't have rats. Which is just such a classic upper management doublespeak situation. Anyway, so he goes through the hotel and he's talking about all the suites and all of that, and as he kind of continues, they kind of go through the other areas, like the lobby area, the dining room, and the lounge, and then he kind of hands him over to a guy named Watson, who is he's more the maintenance guy of the hotel. And he's gonna tell him about how to wait.
He's more than just the maintenance guy.
Well, yeah, he is the maintenance guy, but actually, his family originally were the owners and proprietors of the Overlook Hotel. So that's kind of an interesting thing. But they kind of and this is something that Ullman talks about during his spiel, that he's not that generally, for almost its entire history, the Overlook Hotel, for all of its splendor and grandeur and all of that, has not been a particularly profitable venture. I think he says that last year was the first time in its 80-year history that it broke even, and this year being 1977, is the first time that they ever turned a profit.
Yeah.
So, and he goes through the history of the hotel, and maybe if it becomes relevant, we might circle back to some of these figures. But all you really need to know is that Watson, the maintenance man, comes from what was once a wealthy family that has kind of been returned to the sort of like worker status rather than like the capital owning class. Oh, you know what? This is while I'm thinking about it. This is I think Ullman mentions. I think I kind of glossed over the name, but the guy that gets Jack the job is Al Shockey, who is a guy that sits on the board of directors. That basically he basically was the one that put Jack up for this role and said, "Hey, you need to hire him." And I guess one last little spiel, little thing that's mentioned here is that Ullman refers to an incident that happened in Jack's previous employment that led to his dismissal, and that's something that is kind of but he's like, well, but I guess that doesn't really matter. But it's kind of like laying the groundwork for that review.
Yes. And I just want to say that one of the things that I love about Stephen King is in all of his books, at least the ones that I have gone through myself, in all the books of Stephen King that I've gone through, there's always that central voice that is 100% King, but there's like little nuances in each of the books that make them feel a little more unique, a little more kind of just different and out there, while still retaining that centralized, oh yeah, I'm reading a Stephen King novel kind of thing. And I think this one has that too, with its style that I really enjoy, and you get it almost right off the bat. It's almost like it's super erratic, and it has a lot of jumping back and forth in a lot of ways. And I guess this is as good of a place as any to throw this in there instead of having to go back into this later on when it becomes a little more prevalent. But something that I feel like it takes a truly great author to do successfully is how deftly in this novel King is able to jump from perspective to perspective almost just seamlessly, and he does it in a paragraph, not in a chapter break, not in a page break. It'll just be from one paragraph to the next. Oh, I'm in Danny's perspective, and then suddenly, oh no, I'm in Wendy's, and then oh wait, no, now I'm in Jack's, now I'm back to Danny, and it's just, I don't know. This book has a really interesting, unique, and very entertaining style to it that still retains that King charm.
Fluidity.
Yeah, fluidity is good too.
Yeah, I've heard some people, particularly in the writing world, refer to that sort of as head hopping, and generally discourage it. But I feel like King, for numerous reasons, including one of the things, including his very strong voice and like strength of style, is he's I think he shows that you can navigate it. You just have to, like all laws and rules of writing and really any art form, there are rules. You can break them. You just have to do it well. If you do it well, if you can break the rule well, then the rule no longer applies to you.
Yeah, I definitely think King is one of those people that was able to do that successfully, but I would never, ever, ever recommend anyone doing that. It's kind of like McCarthy and his punctuation, or lack thereof. It's the exact same concept, just different application.
Yeah, I think, he's particularly good at like I said up at the top, is the interpersonal, and like King writes people really well, and at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're back at the hotel. He's telling him he told him the history and all that, and he's he talks about certain things that they talk that you might recall if you've seen the movie, like the topiary animals, and like the the ballroom and the bar and all of that stuff. Just kind of setting up some places that we will return to later. One he refers to as the, I've never heard of this sport before, but roque court, which apparently is like a proto croquet. Yeah, never ever heard of that.
I don't know.
At any
it
point.
uses a mallet with one end rubber and one wooden.
Yeah, it's
Sure.
it's for people that are more wealthy than I am. So
Yeah.
I've not run into that too many times.
Yeah, I'll just stick with my Maddens and my FIFAs and my MLB the shows, if you don't mind me. What's that? They're $70 now. Never mind.
Maybe every other year at best. Anyway, so you know what? I think isn't this the part where he kind of tells the story of like the previous caretakers?
Yeah, this is when we get the break. Yeah, Watson is the one that gives Jack the Grady incident.
Okay, yeah, I guess that's the and the reason I remember this is because I do remember that comment, and this is where we hit another kind of key theme that kind of follows Jack throughout the novel. This this sort of thing about alcoholism, and if I believe, I don't mean to keep derailing us here, but I think that's something that King talked about when it was part of his inspiration here, was some of his struggle with addiction in his personal life kind of inspired some of this little bit here that we kind of introduced into Jack here, this alcoholism, and Grady he tells him about the previous caretaker Grady. He says that he was an alcoholic, and he implies that is a big part of why his caretakership failed, essentially. And Jack, he denies it rather vociferously. Perhaps he doth protest too much, but yeah, that's essentially that's the genesis of that theme there. I think there is what else happens in the first chapter that we need to hit.
I think the Grady incident really just kind of covers it. I mean, unless you want to talk about the boiler or whatever, where it's like, oh, you gotta make sure you creep it down. You actually creep up. You gotta make sure you bring it down.
Okay, yeah. I guess I'll just hit very briefly. When he's talking to Watson, Watson is like a classic mid 20th century kind of like provincial kind of like, I guess kind of a lunkhead, to be honest with you. To use a term of the time, he's not. He's just like, yep, you gotta. He's very coarse. He's very loquacious in his way, and he refers to himself as being, is it something like meaner than a braided snake or something like that. Anyway, he's one of those kind of guys. I'm sure you've met those kind of people that are volunteer entirely too much information about themselves, intentionally making themselves look bad in some instances, and generally being fairly unpleasant while talking about while trying to walk you through something that you have to do at a job. I think that everybody's had that training session. But yeah, he's telling him that the boiler is really old. He's got to rotate it through the hotel like every day to heat different sectors, so that prevent the damage, and that the pressure build up. The pressure builds up because it's an old model that was created before they had contemporary controls to prevent catastrophic failures such as that. If I had to guess, this is a big old Chekhov's exploding boiler that will probably go off, if I may have a little conjecture here. Um,
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm leaning as well. Yeah, so it had been alluded to a few times up to this point, but we're still in the first chapter and we're already getting the payoff for it. The Grady incident, as it were. So Grady was the last name, right, or of the entire family,
I think
or
so.
was it I think it was their last name.
I think the man's name was was something Grady.
Yeah,
The Grady family.
so this was something that Ullman had really pulled for because he was of the opinion that a man with his family will have an easier time doing the job because he won't feel so lonely, and this is kind of why he is so apprehensive towards the Torrances doing it this time because of his faith in the Gradys and what ended up happening because of that. So it's almost kind of a he's kind of afraid of this happening again. Gee, I wonder if it will. So the Gradys, it was a husband, a wife, and two daughters, and they went to the Overlook for their little caretakership over the winter. And what ended up happening was, according to Watson, Grady was somehow able to sneak in some booze. But I have to wonder, like, for this to have happened, I mean, like, geez, dude, did he just have an entire bar fully stocked in the trunk of his car or something? Because, like, I don't think sneaking in a bottle of bourbon would lead to what ended up happening unless it was just one particularly bad night where things just went to shit, which I don't think was the case. But that's more so me being the role of the omniscient reader more so than just a character in the universe. But I digress. Basically, Grady got a little bit of that little Overlook fever mixed in with a little bit of the old man's sippy cup, and took a hammer to both of his daughters and his wife. Or no, he took a shotgun rather, right? He took a shotgun to
I think he didn't he kill the daughters with like a hatchet or something.
it could have been that, yeah. There might have been a blunt or bladed instrument involved in the murder, but there was definitely also a shotgun involved in the murder, at least in the suicide part of that murder. So he killed his family, and then he ended up killing himself. And needless to say, I don't think that was very good for the Overlook, depending on when that happened. Let me just be Ullman here for a second. Let's say that happened in, like, I don't know, January. That's like 4 months of just no upkeep and just dead bodies just kind of like rooting around in the place for Ullman's sake. I'm gonna be on Team Ullman here for just a quick second, just for sake of the conversation here. Just for sake of the conversation, I'm gonna be on Ullman's side here.
Oh my God, he's being possessed by the ghost of Jack Nicholson,
who's still very much alive.
Yeah, actually went to the Lakers game last playoffs.
Yeah, I really hope that I can't do a Jack Nicholson, so forgive me. But I'm gonna keep doing it because I'm stubborn. I really hope that all these bodies, all of this murder situation happened at least in early May, so that maybe, see what I did there, the bodies were only there for like a week or two before they were discovered, and maybe the boiler didn't creep up so bad like it does. So that was the Grady incident, and I apologize to everybody for that because I'm sure that sounded worse for you than it did in my head.
Yeah, it was. So that was I think this is also. I just want to throw out here. This is like Jack. Then he goes into his spiel about like no, it's fine because Wendy, I'm a writer slash playwright. Yeah, playwright. And Wendy, she reads a lot, and this is something that I thought was funny. He mentions that Danny like has toys and stuff, and it's just I'm just like, I gotta say, there are definitely real challenges to parenting in the digital age, especially parenting with like in the iPad and phone world. But man, it is way easier to keep a kid occupied relative to 1977.
Yeah, I can just imagine Jackson there like, no, 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 it's fine. You don't got to worry about Danny. I bought him a coloring book.
That's basically it. That's like it's like okay, that's gonna keep him occupied for what, a week until he, you know.
No, no, it's fine. I bought him a 12-pack of Crayola.
Basically, that's the. It feels. I don't know how many. This is something that is kind of alluded to later, but um, like, have you read any depictions of like people that went on the Oregon Trail that departed too late into the year,
I did not.
Kind of think groups like the Donner Party, which are referenced by name.
How topical.
They're basically it smacks of that. It's like this idea of like, oh, we'll be fine. Other people have had these problems, but we'll be fine. It's just which is I think part of what King is satirizing is not the right word, but that it is maybe perhaps commenting on is like this very American like, yeah, well maybe it didn't work for anybody else, but maybe it'll work for us.
Yeah.
That kind of situation.
The classic Tobias Funke open marriage relationship.
Yes, the Funke gambit.
Yeah. Oh, it didn't work for any of them, but it might for us. Yeah. And I'm sure, as you know, the perfect situation for a struggling writer is isolation with the two people that will probably be the biggest distractions for his writing.
Definitely is not going to lead to any tension nor resentment.
Nope. Definitely no murderous intent.
Let's see. I'm trying to think. I think basically he gets the job. He gets back with Ullman. Ullman is like, hey, I'm tough, but I got to run a tight ship to do this right, and I hope there aren't any hard feelings. And then they shake hands, and Jack is like, I really hate you, essentially. And maybe I don't wish to be uncharitable here or imply anything negative about any person, but I feel like the intent that we're supposed to come away with that is like, wow, this Jack guy is really resentful. But maybe not to his extent, but I can understand, I'm sure everybody can, that they've been through, they've been on the job hunt or had a job where they have felt very condescended to, and perhaps they had some sort of manager or supervisor that's like, well, I'm tough, but I just tell it like it is, or I'm tough, but that's just the way I have to be to make it work, and there is a certain that doesn't really alleviate, at least in my experience, like a little sense of like, okay, but you're really you're really starting to get on my nerves here, man.
Yeah.
But anyway, that might be at least worth thinking about if you were kind of like tracing like the character arcs. Is like this could be the introduction of this idea that Jack is a very resentful man.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who works in a form of leadership at my job, in my personal experience, I feel like my day-to-days and my employees' day-to-days work a lot better if we get along. So, like, that's kind of my approach to it, is I'm not I run a tight ship and that's what it means, and it's like, yeah, I may be an asshole, but hey, the productivity's there. No, I try to be, the understanding, nice kind of boss, and, I feel like that's what I get back from the people that are under me. So, I don't think that mentality honestly works.
What a novel concept. Treat people like people, and you'll benefit from not having people think you're a jerk, and keeping them focused on the work.
Yeah. And I mean,
anyway,
a work environment that's allowing any form of fun is a thriving work environment.
We're back with I guess meanwhile we're back in Boulder, which is where the Torrances have moved. Following, and this is something that they kind of talk about here. They live in Boulder, Colorado. Nice town. Probably at this point, it's maybe not quite what it is now, but still pleasant in its way. Wendy, she's waiting for Jack to come back, and their son Danny, he's basically sitting on the curb outside their apartment, waiting for him to pull up. And basically they're kind of in this place. This apartment is kind of cramped. Not very well appointed necessarily. It's they make a point of it being old and a little bit run down, and she kind of muses on Jack, and basically his actions have kind of brought them to this place, and they had to move from, they had a house, they had this life, and now they're here halfway across the country in this small dirty apartment. See, she goes outside, and then she sits next to Danny, who is their son, and she asks him. This is a phrase that you'll get used to hearing quite a bit as you get through the novel. "What's up, Doc?" Apparently, that's what their nickname for Danny is. They call him Doc.
Yeah, very catchy. I don't know. I feel like something like that. I'm surprised it never really caught on in pop culture.
I don't know. It might have been like a Cary Grant thing or something. I don't know. So something to think about, ponder, see if we could remember where that comes from. And
I don't know. It's really bugging me. Bunny.
We could keep going, but I don't think anybody is gonna figure out what we're alluding to here.
You're being really daffy right now.
Well, you're. I was going to say being pig-headed about it, but I'm like, that doesn't make sense without the Porky context. But anyway,
Daniel, I'm gonna really need you to shut the FUD up, okay?
Wow, harsh, but fair. And we're gonna anyway. So they're waiting there, and there's Jack is driving back, and he's driving back in this VW bug, and it's not. There's like a problem. There's like the fuel pump or something, and there's something that Danny and Wendy are talking about. There's a lot of concern about it, and she's trying to calm Danny down, because Danny's a little bit worried about all of this, and we kind of get this idea here that is kind of floated, that he is sort of precocious. To put it one way, he's very young, and yet he seems to ask very penetrating questions, and has a very sort of a strange intuition for someone of his age. And one of the things Danny asks is why Jack lost his job back in, I want to say it was Vermont. And Wendy's kind of taken aback. She's not sure. This is something that her and Jack have discussed, how are we going to talk about this to Danny? And they've gone back and forth about how to do it, but essentially they were never able to come to a real consensus, and they just kind of let it go. But in the way that children are people, I think people sometimes forget that. These questions remain, and eventually Danny, after wondering all this time, he has to ask her, what really happened with Dad back in Stovington. And Wendy, perhaps exhausted or taken aback, she's not really sure how to respond to him, so she chooses to respond with pretty much full candor here, where she says that basically Jack, he was a writer, not a writer, he was an English teacher, and writing class and debate coach at this school back in Stovington. It was like a prep school or some such, and basically what happened was he was running the debate team, and he had to cut a student from the debate team, and that led to the student becoming pretty angry about it, and he slashed the tires on the Volkswagen, and basically at that point Jack caught him in the act and then started physically kind of like beating him up a little bit, and then there was so after and during that confrontation, they both like somebody sees them, they go into the principal's office, and essentially the principal is like, oh crap, we've basically this is a huge scandal. So basically he decides the best way to handle it is to get rid of both of them. So the student is expelled and Jack is fired, and basically after that that's why they are in the situation that they're in, and she starts to get a little anxious, and she's like, do you want to go inside and have some milk and some Oreos? And Danny is like, no, I'm okay. I'll just wait outside for Dad, and this is kind of an interesting point here that's kind of brought up, is that Danny really has a very strong attachment to his father. He really in a lot of ways idolizes his father, and has a a bond with him of sorts that's kind of as we'll see later might be potentially a vector that will come back to hurt him somewhat. They basically when they're going, then they talk a little bit more, and they basically they talk about how they feel about if Jack does get the job, and there's basically this situation where Wendy is not really sure about it. She'll go with it if it's what Jack wants. Danny is like, okay, I guess it's okay with. He doesn't really have any friends in Boulder, classic new kid situation, and so he's having a hard time fitting in. So he's kind of apathetic to leaving to go to the mountain. He's like, it's just as well. It doesn't really seem to matter to him too much one way or the other. Because, well, I guess I should clarify last little bit. He doesn't have friends in Boulder. I don't want to make it seem like he's like this kind of little shut in. He did have friends back in Stovington, but he's just having a hard time adjusting to the move, essentially.
So one thing about this book that I think is really conducive to the reading experience is how a lot of the timeline kind of jumps back and forth a lot. Like in the present time in this bit, in the build up to them leaving to go to the Overlook Hotel, there's a lot of backstory that we kind of get pieces of as it kind of builds this puzzle throughout the introduction of the book. Throughout, I think it's the entirety of part 1, because I think part 2 is them getting to and getting introduced to the Overlook as a whole. So like this part 1 bit, it's more than just establishing the characters. It's kind of building this puzzle piece of who they were and kind of what put them in the situation. So the main catalyst of the Overlook situation is, as previously mentioned, the incident that got Jack fired, with the incident with back in Vermont at oh god, what was the school called? Scovington, and the George Hatfield incident. But we get a lot more going even further back, because this was kind of like the spark that kind of ignited the powder keg of this book. So we get there's this really nice bit. I really enjoy this. This kind of gives us this is one of the Wendy backstories. Is we get this kind of almost storybook-esque kind of build up of her relationship with Jack, about how he ostensibly, like, she had an estranged relationship with her mother because she was like it sounds like she was a narcissist, honestly. And it kind of led to her being kicked out, and in college she found Jack and they fell in love, and she got to kind of like rekindle with her father, which her mother is an entire can of worms, to the point where she blames her for the divorce with her father, and that's just messed up in so many ways. Yeah, we get the story of their love, so to say, and how perfect it was, and how in love with each other they were, and then they got married, and they had Danny. But then once Jack got into his writing and he got success, and he was drinking, and it became a problem. So Jack ends up becoming an alcoholic, and it's while he gets his writing prestige, as minor as it is in the grand scheme of things. I think he said that he had ended up publishing, I think it was something in the ballpark of like a dozen short stories.
Well, he got a publication in, was it Esquire?
Yeah, that was the first one.
That was a pretty big deal. Paid $900. Probably still would only get you $900 to publish.
Yeah, right. Almost 50 years later, the rates have not gone up, and the prestige has only gone down. But yeah, by the time he gets his job is it Stovington? Is that the school's name? It's something close to
Stovington is the city. I forget what the name of the preparatory academy was.
I think it's called It's Stovington Preparatory Academy. I think that's actually what it's called. I could be remembering wrong. I don't know. But yeah, so when he ends up getting the job there, I think I said he'd only published 4 at that point, but he ends up getting like 12 published, and he's kind of living off of the prestige of that, and that's what's kind of getting him through. His like, that's what got him the job, and that's kind of what's keeping him at the job by the point up to when he ends up getting fired. Yeah, he meets Al Shockley there, and they become fast friends. And Shockley is someone whose father was super important, and he was like on the board of the school, and he's super uber rich, and he's a wealthy family, and Al inherited it, including his positions on the board when his father died. But Al is also a little more down to earth. He was the coach of the tennis team, and they became super quick friends, and they became drinking buddies, and the alcoholism like really snowballed from there. And it kind of created a rift between Wendy and Jack, especially after Danny was born, which it's not because of Danny, it's just kind of... But at the same time, after Danny was born, it caused a rift that was growing, but it also kind of created a bridge that was growing along with it, weirdly enough. There's some really... I don't know if I would go as far as to say it's like an abuse thing with Wendy. Maybe partially it is, with her thinking that as much as she had thought about leaving Jack and taking Danny and going and, just leaving him completely, it was because of Danny that she felt more tied to Jack. And it wasn't so much a stay together for the kids kind of thing. It was this idea, and she goes into it later on when she's thinking back on it as they're heading up to the Overlook, that it was like there is some almost supernatural force that is just keeping them together, and it's not like forcing them to be together, but it's like the bonds of their love are so strong that it will take some external force to rip them apart. Nothing that Jack does can ever truly tear them apart, and I don't know, it sounds endearing, if not for the fact that Jack is honestly kind of an abusive drunk. And not even
I would say
drunk.
Not even kind of. I would say pretty plainly he is abusive.
Yeah, he's an abusive drunk, but he also is abusive when he's not a drunk. Just maybe he still has that really bad temper. It just might not be as quick. So yeah, Shockley and Jack, they hang out, they drink together. Wendy's thinking about divorce. And then there's an incident where they're going out and they're getting drunk and they're heading back, and Al's driving, and there's a bicycle in the middle of the road, and they hit it and they spend a couple of hours looking for the body because there had to have been a body. They had to have hit a kid that was riding that bike. There's no way there was just a bike sitting up in the middle of the road without somebody on it. But they can't find anything, and it's really weird. It's probably some supernatural thing. Maybe it was the turtle. Maybe the turtle put a bicycle there for Jack. I don't know. Um, and that's kind of their kind of come to Jesus moment, and they both swear off alcohol at that point. And that's when Jack starts to begin his path to sobriety, which I want to say that he says that in the first chapter it had been 14 months since then. At this point where we're starting in the book, it's been 14 months that he's been sober. And oddly enough, the next morning after that situation is when Wendy decides she's gonna finally commit and divorce him. But then he asks her if, because she says we need to talk, and he's like, can we wait to have this conversation for a week? And the way that he says it and the way that he's acting stops her enough to allow him that week, and she notices that he does stop drinking, and it kind of pushes the conversation to the side. So that's like Jack kind of overcoming his alcoholism, him and Al together, and you'd think that it would be a major turning point for his character, but it kind of isn't, because then that kind of leads us to the situation that is the catalyst for the novel, and that is the George Hatfield incident, in which there's a lot of incidences in this book, a little more than just a bit of assault, kind of a big thing. So then the board voted, and they're like, yeah, Jack, we're going to need you to turn in your letter of resignation, which Jack agrees to, and that's how he ended up losing his job, and that's put us in the position where Al was like, this is bullshit, but, I'll get them to come around, don't worry. But as it stands, Jack is now without a job, and this is what leads him to Al getting him the job at the Overlook. That's like a very broad stroke of like the backstory. There's a lot more nuance to it because obviously I'm summarizing a lot here, but the character work in this section is phenomenal. As you said earlier, King thrives on character writing, and it doesn't show any better than when we're getting, especially on Wendy's side of things. I feel how he writes Wendy, and how like her situation with her mother and her father, and with Jack and Danny. I don't know. I think it's great. She has a lot of trauma, a huge amount of trauma.
It may not be perfect, but you can tell that it is written with a lot of tenderness and affection, and I think it is, for its time, certainly, a very well written depiction of a woman who's experienced a lot of trauma and abuse.
Yeah, and I don't take it so much as Wendy being helpless, but it is definitely Wendy being a victim. So I don't know. Maybe or at least at first it's supposed to be taken as Wendy being helpless, and I think her arc through the story is supposed to be her going from being a helpless victim of abuse from her mother, from Jack, and feeling like she's basically tied to him because of Danny and not because of Danny, and how Danny feels tied to Jack as well. Maybe this book is going to be also in the background the story of Wendy becoming a stronger woman, a stronger human, and able to break the bonds that she's kind of tied to right now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to I don't want to like say that she's powerless necessarily, but I think a little context is important here, that when this book was written, I mean, a lot of women were not able to exercise full. Maybe yes, they had voting rights. The Roe v. Wade decision was just a few years before this, so maybe they had certain autonomy. But like we're talking like we're like single digits of years after women were able to have like bank accounts, like legally required to allow to have bank accounts that were not under the control of like their husband or other quote unquote responsible figure. Like women at this stage of history in even throughout the world, but even in America, was they were. It was sometimes pretty tough. You know.
Yeah. But yeah, like I said, I kind of like sped through a lot of it. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of detail. Most of part one is about these pieces of the backstory, and I really enjoy the character writing. I think we get a lot of good insight into, especially Jack and Wendy, and we kind of get a little bit of an idea of who Danny is, and we get an introduction to his ability, I guess is a way to put it, with how he has his visions where he sees things and he hears thoughts that other people have, and the things that he sees may or may not end up coming true. And one of the catalysts to it is as his parents put it, his imaginary playmate Tony, and how Tony is essentially some sort of like otherworldly, like warner, for lack of a better term, someone who warns him.
Entity, Oracle. I don't know.
Yeah.
He Go ahead.
And like, yeah, we see that there's a lot of like precognition happening here, and there's a lot of we're getting snippets of things that are likely to come later on in the book. We're getting like dialogue that I'm trying to skirt around the very obvious thing that's probably going to happen, especially if you've seen the movie. We're getting these scenes that are going to be happening later. And like also with that, Danny with his it's almost like an empath kind of mind reading, to where he can feel emotions, and sometimes it's straight up thoughts, but a lot of the time it's emotions that are categorized through words or phrases that he can't really read, but he can just kind of feel. Like he sees the words, but he feels them more than reads them because he can't read yet. And one of the big ones that was going on for a long time was with his mom with divorce. And there's a point where apparently that this is Wendy's recollection, is when he was younger, he at one point he just grabbed her arms and he's like, "Do you love Daddy? Do you love me?" And that was I think she was thinking about divorce at the time, and she doesn't know what to make of it.
That's a big part of why Wendy did stay. Is Danny, he's too young to really understand the full ramifications of it. He feels it, and it frightens him, like the implications of the feeling of divorce. It's obviously a very painful, and it's a thing that's difficult for even like adults to talk about or think about. But when you filter it through the mind of like a pre-literate, like 4 or 5-year-old child, I'm sure it's very it's very scary.
Yeah. And another thing that he picks up on that he can't quite truly explain is Jack's suicidal thoughts that he has, his feeling of worthlessness, and thinking that it would take suicide for him to essentially, as like the only answer would be for him to kill himself in order to essentially relieve Danny and Wendy of the burden that he causes them. And that's another thing that Danny picks up on, but he doesn't quite fully understand. Another thing is Jack's alcoholism, which is referred to from Wendy as the bad thing, and he knows that his dad thinks about the bad thing a lot. So like there's a lot of emotional storytelling told through the perception of a 5-year-old child who has some form of telepathy and precognition. It's a very interesting take, to say the least.
Yeah.
But without going too much more into it, like it really is something that kind of feeds itself through the way that it's told through the story itself. Like there's a lot more context, there's a lot more character work, and it's very good. But just kind of like to breeze through it just for sake of time and fluidity. Yeah, there's just a lot of build up to who these characters are and what kind of put them in the position to lead them to the Overlook, and it's great writing, it's great character work, and there's a lot of foreshadowing in here, I feel, and there's a lot of a lot of good stuff. I don't know. I really liked part 1. I thought it was very good.
Yeah, I really liked it. It's good setup for a lot of the things to come, I'm sure. Essentially, Jack gets home from the interview, and he's pulling up, and he takes Danny. He gets home, and he tells everybody that they've got the job, or he's got the job rather, and he's going to he's going to go and phone his friend Al, just to let him know everything worked out and it's all good. They do have a phone at home, and this is something that I think is kind of a crucial thing to mention here. But there is like a little bit. It's that little this weird tension, this weird marital strife that's going on between him and Wendy. So he's just gonna take some quarters and head down and use the old payphone. And he takes Danny with him. Again, just to kind of continue to lay this pattern of like Danny and this very strange relationship between father and son. So he goes and he's calling Al, and he told him he's about something like 2,000 miles away, and we get a little bit of the backstory of Al. I think Dusty mentioned this just a couple minutes ago. And they talk about. Then we kind of get into a little bit about the Al's past, about how he was married, and it's kind of an interesting kind of showing like the different ways that alcoholism can kind of like impact people. Like Al and his wife, they got a divorce. Jack and Wendy, their relationship is kind of, were it not for Danny, I feel that the relationship would be over. And he's kind of thinking about his life. He's thinking as he's waiting to get a hold of Al. He even mentions, and this is a pretty astonishing revelation, that after the George Hatfield incident, he's really wanting a drink. He's wanting a drink now. He's thinking about that what time he wanted a drink, and it's getting under his skin. He wanted to take it out on Wendy and Danny, this agitation that he's feeling underneath. So anyway, that's really it. Al is able to. He finally picks up the phone. Little thing for our younger listeners, but there was a time before answering machines. If a phone could just ring and ring and ring, then it wouldn't stop. So it's kind of, so the operator's kind of getting annoyed with Jack because the phone call is not going through, and but eventually Al picks up after a couple minutes, and they have a really quick conversation. Al is giving him the update, like, hey, I'm working on the board. I think they're coming back around. Some people are even saying we moved a little too quickly on the resignation, but everything should be good. And so it's kind of creating the situation where Jack feels like things are looking up. He got the job. He's got a hold of his old friend. Things are looking up for him back home. Maybe in 1978, things, his life will be back on track more or less. But anyway, the conversation goes pretty well, and Jack thanks him one more time, and they go back into the car, and they talk a little bit about, he talks to Danny about this vision that Danny had while he was driving back, and they're talking about it, and in the way that sometimes parents do, their attention begins to wander from these conversations that the child feels are very significant and very meaningful. It is definitely true in the case of Danny, because he's got this, as Dusty mentioned, this sort of, not just a precognition of sorts, but like this sort of like connection with a spiritual realm of like that gives him some sort of like mystical powers of some sort. Anyway, Danny's trying to kind of communicate to him that he was this feeling that he doesn't know that he's intercepting from Jack, but it is kind of scaring him like this. Jack thinking about the bad thing, you know, Jack potentially hurting him again. Um, but Jack is not really, he is kind of off in his own world because of his, it's he, even though he is maybe to a certain extent free from some of like the more immediate aspects of his addiction, he doesn't really, I don't think he's really addressed the underlying issues, and that probably not developed much in the way of like coping mechanisms. So you can see that it is still very present in his thinking.
So, yeah, one of the big precog event that I almost said incident. Well, yeah, we'll call this the incident episode.
This is such an upsetting nightmare that I think it qualifies as an incident.
Yeah, the precog incident that is kind of it will be the backdrop of a lot of what happens in this novel. Is so Danny has one of his visions, and Tony is warning him about it. Don't go, Danny. Come to me. No, Danny. No. And he's seeing like these visions of being chased with a man with a hammer. He's like, "Oh, I gotta take your medicine. Oh, come on. Oh, I'm gonna hurt you." Woo. And the big thing that he kind of keeps seeing is this vision, this sense, this word that keeps kind of like it's like I said, he can't read it, but he feels it. He feels the word, so he knows the word, but he can't read the word. It's weird, but it makes perfect sense. And that word is red rum, which, boy, I wonder what that means. I don't know. Maybe if I take a good look in the mirror, I'll figure it out. So that's kind of like the backdrop. That's kind of being the tension builder of the novel at this point is the red rum dream, and there's hate in it. There's a sense of, oh, there's a word for this. The act of intentionally taking another person's life. There's a word for it. It's a 6-letter word. What's the word for it? I can't think of it. Anyways, so there's this like backdrop of tension and malicious intent happening, and at the center of it all is red rum, and we don't know what that means yet. So that's kind of a thing that kind of keep on the back burner. Like I said, it's a tension builder, and we'll see how that kind of starts adding on to itself as the story goes on. But that is the precog incident, if you will. If that is the precog incident, if you will, that has kind of put Danny on the path of the plot of the story.
Yeah.
So they're making their way to the Overlook at this point, and the VW is not really doing too well, but it does well enough to make it there, and they eventually, out of a little bit of family, after a little bit of family banter, they end up making it to. They crest the hill of the Sidewinder Pass, which is ostensibly going to be the point of no return once the snow starts to set in. And they make it to the top, and they look out in the distance and can see the Overlook, and Jack and Wendy are like, "Oh wow, it's beautiful, I can't believe it." Meanwhile, Danny's like, "Oh my god, this is the place that I saw in my dreams. Oh my goodness, red rum, red rum." So there we go. We once again we get the building of tension because this precognition has seen the Overlook, and we have gotten a glimpse of some bad things that either have or can or will happen. Because at this point, we could be. I'm gonna be a little cute here. We could be Danny could have been experiencing the Grady incident. I mean, he didn't. Let's be real here. But maybe it was the Grady incident that he was seeing. So maybe it's going to be a little different this time. I don't know. Maybe it's just you should get a little vision of the past. Who knows? So yeah, that's kind of a thing. But Danny's trying to hide it because he knows that if he tries to bring this up to them, they either won't understand or he'll get in trouble for it because it's not. This might be a shocker at this point, but this is not the healthiest family. So crazy, I know. But they end up making it to the Overlook. It's closing day. That's what they call it, right? Is it closing day or checkout day? What?
Closing day, I think.
Yeah, so it's super packed with all the guests checking out for the season and leaving. They're just kind of watching as Ullman's kind of giving them the rundown, like, yeah, hey, you're here, welcome, closing day, woo. And we get these incidents of the just watching the different kinds of customers as they're leaving, and we have this woman. Is it Miss Blake or Miss Burke? What was the name of the woman? Something.
I'm trying to remember.
One of those two. It's not really important. She really only kind of exists for more Danny shenanigans and some nice little humor thrown in. I love this bit. There's a bit where she at first she's complaining about how I always use my American Express. I've been coming here for years. I always use my American Express. And then, as she's leaving, Danny gets a really loud thought from her head as she sees the valet bringing her car around, where she thinks that, man, she'd really love to get into that boy's pants. And Danny's just like, why would she want to get in his pants? Is she cold or something? Like, Mom always wears pants this time of year. Why doesn't she wear her own pair of pants? And it's such a funny moment.
It becomes a little bit of a recurring bit here.
Yeah, and one thing that King has done really well in this section as a whole is use Danny as a form of comedic relief, because there's a bit where Jack is talking about how at the animal topiary, how he used to trim a woman's hedges back in college, and him and Wendy are being a little suggestive with trimming a woman's hedges, and Danny's like, "Did she have a big hedge, Dad?" And that just kind of sends them both over the edge. And so Danny's used as a bit of adult humor throughout this section for both Jack, Wendy, and also later on we'll see with Halloran, and I love it. I'm all about it. It's great. It's a great use of Danny's character, his innocence, and a great way to just kind of throw some levity in the book so far, to kind of like try and mask the tension that is still building at this point, to almost kind of like put you off guard to it. It's very, very well done. Just phenomenal writing going on right here.
Yeah, I think part of it is King drawing from his own experiences at that point of being I don't know how to when I say young father, I don't necessarily mean that he was like super young. It's just like he was just early on in his fatherhood. He had kids that still had kids that were very young, and I think he's able to draw from it here, and just the innocence, the sort of like unintentional comedy of the children can bring, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And so Ullman's like, yeah, I got some things to do, closing up shop and all that business. So he sends them to go talk to Halloran, who is the head chef, and he needs to talk to Wendy and show Wendy around the kitchen so that she's aware and familiar with ostensibly what's going to keep them alive, so that they don't become the Torrance Donner family. And so now we meet Dick Halloran, who is the best character in this book, and it's not even close. I love Halloran. He's great.
He is certainly very likable. He's definitely the most likable character to this point.
Yeah, I love him. He's funny. He's intelligent. He's just he's very well written. Yeah,
like definitely the kind of guy that you would want to hang out with.
Yeah,
definitely the kind of guy that you go to work. He's one of the guys that you don't mind being around. That's something that I don't mean to step on your toes here, but that is something that kind of they establish here is this he's obviously he acts very friendly towards Danny, and not just in a way that would just seem very like he's just a nice, gregarious, friendly man, but that like it kind of like sets the stage for exploring other aspects of their respective characters here as well.
So yeah, Halloran, a lot of this is just him being like, stoves here, fridge is here, meat's here. I got you guys turkey for Thanksgiving. Woo woo. But the real main takeaway of this section is Danny and Halloran and their interactions together. And there are these really great moments, and King does a good job of um that he does a little bit of tell don't show, but he also does a little bit of show don't tell. In that Halloran calls him Doc, um, and they're just like, "Oh wow, how do you know we call him Doc?" And he's like, "What do you mean?" And they're like, "Oh, we call him Doc sometimes." He's like, "Oh, he kind of looks like one." And he kind of plays it off kind of well. And then there's a point where he's like, "Oh, I can't remember my name. What's my name again?" And Danny's like, "Halloran, but to friends, you're Dick." And he's like, "That's right." And then the Jack and Wendy are looking at each other like, "Oh, I don't know if I remember him ever saying his first name was Dick. I don't know." So that's a little bit of the tell don't show side of things, but there's like a lot of context that you can, if you're paying attention, you'll pick up that the two of them are like communicating with each other with information that has not been spoken, and it's a lot more than just the Doc and Dick thing. There's like a little more nuance to it, so that's where it gets into the show don't tell side of it that King does with this sequence, and it leads into after the whole hey kitchen food woo. He very very smoothly gets Danny alone as he gets him to help him take his luggage to his car as he's leaving, and he's like, "Hop in, let me talk to you for a minute." A lot of great jokes about him. He being like, "Danny, come to Florida, Danny and Florida, Danny, come to Florida with me and for the winter. It'll be great." And then they get in the car, and Wendy's like, "Oh my god, he's not gonna actually take him to Florida with him, is he? I thought he was joking. Oh my god." But they have their conversation. This is when we get introduced to the Shine or the Shining. And yeah, this is a really cool bit. We get a lot more context into Danny's abilities, and Halloran shares them, and he explains how the precog kind of how he understands it is working, and the mind reading, and how Danny is the strongest he's ever encountered with the Shine, and it's this really great moment that kind of really further establishes this almost kind of mentor protege relationship between Danny and Halloran, two characters who have known each other for all of half an hour at this point. I don't know, it's a really good scene, and I like it a lot.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's very good, and some nice character development of the character of Halloran himself too. He talks about basically telepathically communicating with his grandmother. And there's also this little moment where it's kind of interesting that how he's kind of talking with Danny about the idea of this sort of, how to put it. It's when he's like, okay, I want you to, essentially he says, I want you to think something at me really hard as you can. And then the way then Danny kind of does it, and it's almost like it has like an almost physical weight to it. Like he thinks it at him so hard that it's like it takes a toll on him. He's a little bit caught off guard, and it kind of hurts him a little. Not like too bad, not like serious injury, but it is something that he just kind of, it's interesting that it kind of creates this sort of like dynamic, like the idea of like these thoughts having sort of like almost like a mass and a weight of their own. It's kind of interesting. It gives an almost formal component to this to the abstraction of thought.
Yeah. It's definitely a somewhat unique way to have a somewhat common superpower, for lack of a better term. Like the application of it being a nice, I imagine, especially for 77, a very fresh take on something like that.
There are no original ideas. There is only good execution.
Yeah, so exactly. And we also get a payoff of the "why does she want his pants" joke that was established earlier, where he asks him, "Oh yeah, hey, you know this woman? You know the driver guy? Yeah. Why would she want his pants? What do you mean? Oh, she said I heard her thinking that she wants to get in his pants." And man, I yeah, it's just Halloran probably reacts to that the exact same way that I did. Just it just breaks him, and I'm like, man, this is funny. I love this. This is great. So we get that nice little moment too. We get a little payoff of that joke that was set up a couple dozen pages prior. Yeah, but we do also get this moment where Danny opens up to him a little more than he would with his parents because of this commonality that the two of them share with the Shine. In that he tells him about the dream and Tony, and a little more about Tony, and how he's just kind of not really sure about kind of the situation that they're in, and Halloran's like, look, man, hey, nothing here can hurt you. There's nothing in the hotel that can cause you any harm, and he really stresses this so much, like many times. It's like, nothing here can hurt you. If you see anything, he's like, I've seen things here. I've seen things that are like essentially fragments of the past that have been left behind. And the thing about them is, they're just like pictures in a book. They might scare you, but they can't do anything to you. So all you gotta do is just look away, and when you look back, it'll be gone. Nothing here can hurt you. And he also mentions how he also probed Jack and Wendy to see if they had the Shine as well, and he caught a faint reaction in Wendy, and he chalks that up to just something that every mother has, at least while their children are young. And he just kind of like, that's just, as in my experience, that's just a normal motherly reaction, that they have a very small amount of the Shine. And he probed Jack, and I feel like he didn't give us the actual answer as to what he found inside Jack. He kind of danced around it and said he's got something he's hiding, something that he does, or something either he's hiding from, or something he's intentionally hiding, or something that he just does not want to break through the surface. And there's absolutely zero Shine in him. And he kind of ends it off being like, hey man, I'm gonna be in Florida, but if you need me for any reason, I need you to do that little mental shout, shoot your little shout at me as loud as you can, and maybe I'll be able to hear it in Florida, and I'll come running. So with that, Halloran and Danny have their goodbyes. Halloran leaves, still trying to convince himself that nothing can hurt Danny in the Overlook. Dun dun dun.
Yeah, it's just a great segment. I really like Halloran. He's easily my favorite character so far.
It's one of those things for, like, when King is hitting, it's a grand slam, man. Like I do think that King is one of the greatest authors of all time. I'm not saying he's the most consistent, because he definitely isn't, but boy, his highs are some of the highest in literature, in literary, not literary fiction, in fiction literature, I would say. Like, King really knows how to create tension, how to write characters, and how to really build a story. It's almost unparalleled, in my opinion.
Yeah, just really am enjoying the book so far.
Yeah.
Oh, I sorry, just one last little bit about Danny and Halloran. Halloran kind of warns him, and he's like, "Hey, I know, like this was back when they were talking about the getting in the pants joke." He's like, and I know under certain circumstances this could be kind of dodgy, this idea of this man asking a child to keep secrets from his parents, but he's like, what you have, your abilities, people are not going to understand them, and they might take things the wrong way. When you use your powers around them, so you have to be careful about what you disclose about things that you learn through the shine. And I don't know if that's going to come back to be relevant later, but I just thought that was an interesting little piece of information there that of cautioning Danny.
Yeah. And that basically puts us to the end of part 2. All that's really left is their final conversation with Ullman, and he's just basically just like, all right, I'm not gonna have a good holiday. I hate anywhere but here. This is my baby. You better be here when I get back. Okay, bye. And that's basically kind of how we round off part 2. They're at the Overlook. They're now alone, and we are now ready to see how they last for the next 7 months.
Yeah, that about wraps it up for us here. I know, but I think we covered a lot of ground and added a lot of context, and maybe did a little bit of early analysis of themes and stuff that are going to come back around in the future.
Yep.
I'm really enjoying the book so far. I know you are as well, and I don't know. I'm just very excited to see where this goes.
Yep. Yeah, I'm a sucker for King, especially good King. So, yeah, I'm loving this book so far. It's scratching that itch that only he can scratch for me, with books, and it's just, I have such a great time being in his worlds that he creates, mostly in Maine, and just living through these characters. So yeah, I'm a big Stephen King fan. If that has not been made abundantly clear, and yeah, I just I look forward to getting more into this. Yeah, I don't know, not much else to say. I guess just a great book. I'm really enjoying it.
Yep. Well, thank you everybody for tuning into another episode of the Sad Boys Book Club, and I guess we'll see you next time.
Yep. Take care.